My husband took the kids on a luxury vacation for my birthday, and I found out the truth about his betrayal. Now, everything's falling apart. Hey there. Welcome to today's story. Before we dive into it, I want you to think about something. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where everything you thought you knew was turned upside down? A moment where you had to rebuild, to start over, and take control of your own life again? Well, that's exactly what we're going to explore today. Our story is about Michaela, a woman who faced betrayal, the end of a marriage, and the difficult journey of rebuilding herself. It's a roller coaster, but it's also a story of strength, growth, and learning to live for yourself again. Stick around until the end to see how she finds her way out of the darkness and into a new chapter of her life. And hey, if you like the story, hit that subscribe button. We're on the way to 1,000 subscribers, and your support means the world to me. Let's get started. It was supposed to be my special day, my 40th birthday. I woke up to silence, not the usual chaos of family life. The house, usually filled with noise and laughter, was eerily quiet. No breakfast in bed, no cards, not even a text from my husband, Derek. The bed was cold on his side, and I quickly realized that he and the kids weren't home. I searched the house, hoping for an explanation, but there was nothing. No birthday wishes, no surprise, not even the sound of the kids' voices. My phone buzzed. A message from my daughter, Mia, caught my eye. At the beach with Dad. He says we should just enjoy our time since you're too busy to care about fun things. I stared at the screen, my heart sinking. My daughter, she never even mentioned it. It hit me then. My family, my entire world, had abandoned me. Not only was I left alone on my 40th birthday, but they had gone to a resort in Malibu without me, as if I wasn't even worth the effort. I didn't say a word. I just let the tears fall silently, sitting in the silence of the empty house. How had I let myself become invisible to them? My emotions were a chaotic mess. Betrayal, anger, confusion. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I couldn't just sit here and wallow in self-pity. I needed answers. I needed to understand why this was happening. Why I was the one left out in the cold while my family seemed to be living it up without a care in the world. I wasn't going to let them get away with this, not without knowing everything. I started with my phone again, the one device that should have connected me to my family, yet had become a painful reminder of their absence. More photos from Mia, her smile lighting up the screen, looking so carefree. There they were, Mia, Derek, and Jake, all in a pool with a backdrop of some luxurious, impossibly clear water. Derek, grinning ear to ear, posing as the perfect dad. I swallowed hard, but it was the caption under Mia's post that stopped me in my tracks. Dad's showing us how to have real fun since Mom's too busy being boring. The message couldn't have been clearer. I was the problem. I was boring, too dull for them, too wrapped up in my responsibilities, my career, and everything else, while they got to live a life filled with excitement and adventure. The sting from her words cut deeper than I expected. It wasn't just that I had been ignored. It was the intentional flaunting of their absence, as if I was the joke in all of this. I couldn't just ignore it. I wasn't going to let it slide. I reached for my phone and scrolled through their posts again, my fingers trembling. Each new picture, each new comment, felt like another jab in the chest. They were having the time of their lives, and I wasn't even part of the story anymore. The life I thought we had, the family I thought I was a part of, was slipping through my fingers. I needed more answers, and I was determined to get them. I couldn't let this go unanswered, not without understanding the full extent of what was going on behind my back. I grabbed my jacket, my mind racing, and headed to Derek's office. His office was the one place in our home where he thought his secrets would remain hidden. But I had been married to him long enough to know where to look. I had learned early on that the little things mattered, the tiny details that most people overlooked. It wasn't paranoia. It was knowing your partner well enough to recognize when something was off. And something was definitely off. I opened the drawer of his desk. It wasn't locked. He must have been getting careless. As I pulled out the files inside, My heart raced. Bills. Receipts. All of them for things I hadn't been told about. Lavish dinners at five-star restaurants, charges for expensive gifts, luxury hotel bills. All for their family trip. But why was none of this shared with me? Why had he hidden these receipts? I couldn't understand it. I stood there, staring at the stack of receipts in my hands, my mind struggling to process it all. How had I become so invisible in my own marriage? These were the sorts of things couples discussed. These weren't just purchases, they were deliberate acts of exclusion. And why? What had I done to deserve this? My hands trembled as I sifted through the pile, a wave of disbelief crashing over me. Then it hit me. This wasn't just about a forgotten birthday or a missed anniversary. This wasn't a simple case of Derek being careless or thoughtless. No, this was something much deeper. Derek wasn't just neglecting me. He had been living a double life. A life I wasn't a part of. A life where I didn't fit into the picture anymore. I leaned against the desk, my mind spinning. The man I had married, the man I had trusted with my heart, had built an entire life without me. I had been so focused on our children, our home, and my career that I hadn't noticed how far he had drifted. But now the reality was sinking in. His smiles in the pictures with the kids, his big plans for vacations that didn't include me, his secretive phone calls that I had brushed off as work. It all made sense now. He had checked out emotionally and physically from this marriage long before I had realized. And I had been too blind to see it. I stood there, holding the receipts in my hands, my chest tight with the weight of it all. Derek had been living a life of excess and luxury while I was left in the shadows, playing the role of the boring wife who was too preoccupied with responsibilities to be part of his adventure. But what hurt the most wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that I had allowed myself to be sidelined for so long, not because I didn't care, but because I trusted him. And now he had thrown that trust away like it meant nothing. I felt the anger rising within me, but it wasn't just anger at Derek. It was anger at myself for not seeing it sooner, for allowing him to manipulate me into thinking I was the problem. But I couldn't focus on that now. There was no time for self-pity. I needed to confront this head-on. I couldn't keep living in this illusion that everything was okay when it was clearly falling apart. I wasn't just going to sit here and let this happen to me. I was going to fight back. I was going to take control of this situation. With the receipts and evidence in hand, I walked out of Derek's office, my resolve firming with every step. This was just the beginning. I wasn't going to let this man destroy everything I had worked for. And I wasn't going to let him do it without facing the consequences of his actions. No more hiding. No more pretending. The truth was out, and I was going to make sure everyone knew it. The signs had been there for months, maybe even longer, if I'd only been paying closer attention. The late nights, the endless excuses about working overtime, the random business trips that always seemed to crop up on weekends. I knew something wasn't right, but I had convinced myself it was just the pressures of work. After all, we both had careers that required time and attention. I thought I was being understanding. I thought I was being supportive. But now, standing in Derek's office, the one place where he thought he could hide all his secrets, I was surrounded by his lies. I had found the hidden receipts, the credit card statements, and the texts that should have tipped me off. But this was something I hadn't expected. There, nestled between a stack of old documents, was a burner phone. It wasn't just any phone, it was the kind of phone you use to keep things off the radar. The kind of phone that doesn't show up in records or leave a trail. My hand shook as I picked it up, staring at it as if it were some kind of evidence I wasn't meant to find. But I had to know. I had to find out. So I turned it on. What I saw made my stomach drop. On the screen were texts. Texts between Derek and someone I didn't expect. Vanessa, his young assistant. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the messages, each one more intimate and playful than the last. They weren't just work-related. They weren't just business banter. They were personal. They were flirtatious. They were dangerous. Can't wait to see you tonight. You're everything I've needed. It hit me like a ton of bricks. The words felt like a slap to my face. I kept reading, my throat tightening, feeling like I was choking on the words I couldn't unsee. There it was, in black and white, a relationship that had been hidden in plain sight. Derek, my husband, had been seeing her behind my back. He had been using our family funds, our joint money, for his personal enjoyment. It was all right there, laid out in those texts, in the phone numbers he had saved under fake names, in the clandestine plans they had made together. It wasn't just betrayal. It was an entire life he had been living without me. I had been the fool, the one who trusted him, the one who believed the excuses. I thought I was being supportive when he said he needed time away, that work was stressing him out, that he had to travel for clients. I believed every single word. But now, seeing the truth unfold before me, I felt nothing but rage. I had been so wrapped up in keeping our home running, keeping our family together, that I had missed all the signs. I had missed the warning signals that screamed at me every day. The late-night phone calls, the unexplained absences, the way he started to pull away from me emotionally, slowly, bit by bit. All those things should have raised red flags, but I had ignored them. I had kept thinking, it's just stress. He's under pressure. Everything will go back to normal. But now, as I stood in Derek's office, surrounded by his lies, I realized that normal had been gone for a long time. I felt my anger rising, threatening to consume me. But it wasn't just the anger that fueled me now. It was the cold, sharp clarity that was settling into my bones. I had always been the one to keep our family grounded. I had been the one to put aside my career, my ambitions, to help Derek chase his dreams. I had sacrificed so much for this family, for him, and now here I was, the one who had been thrown aside like nothing. I let the phone fall onto the desk, my chest rising and falling with each heavy breath. The weight of the truth was suffocating, but I couldn't let it overwhelm me. I had to think. I had to act. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I wasn't going to be the woman who had everything taken from her while the man she loved walked away unscathed. No, this wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't just a moment of weakness on Derek's part. This was a pattern of deception, lies, and complete disregard for me, for our family. And it had gone on long enough. I had the evidence now. I had everything I needed. But I wasn't going to make the same mistake I had made before. I wasn't going to let my emotions drive me into a rash decision. Derek had been careless. He had thought he could continue hiding this from me. But he had underestimated me. I had always been the one to hold things together. I had always been the one to sacrifice, to make compromises, to hold onto the belief that we could work through anything. But now it was time for me to fight back. Derek was going to face the consequences of his actions, and I wasn't going to let him destroy everything I had built. Not my career, not my dignity, not my future. I stood there for a moment, taking in the evidence in front of me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was determined. This was the moment I had to take control, to step into my power and show Derek that I wasn't the same woman he had known. I wasn't just his wife. I was me, and I wasn't going to let him get away with this. Knock knock. Now you're about to watch the best part of the story. But before that, make sure to subscribe to my channel so we can keep going together. I wasn't going to let Derek win. I wasn't going to let him destroy everything I had worked for. I wasn't going to sit here and let the years of my hard work, my dreams, and everything I had built with him slip away in one moment of betrayal. I had to do something. I had to fight back. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't naive. I had always prided myself on being the calm and logical one, the problem solver. I had spent years helping Derek build his career, supporting him while I put mine on hold. And now it was my turn to take control. I wasn't going to sit by and let him think he could manipulate me anymore. I had resources. I had brains. And most importantly, I had the power of knowledge. I contacted a lawyer, Stephanie, whom I had known for years. She was no nonsense, sharp as a tack, and had a reputation for getting things done. I needed someone who would see the situation for what it was and guide me through it without sugarcoating anything. The moment I explained everything to her, I saw the determination in her eyes. She didn't just empathize with me. She understood what this could mean for my future, for my dignity, and for the kids. "Don't worry, Michaela," she said. "We're going to make sure he pays for what he did. But we need to be thorough. We need to build a case that he can't wiggle out of. Together, we began laying out a strategy. It was meticulous. It wasn't just about catching Derek in a lie. It was about holding him accountable, making sure he faced the full extent of his betrayal. I started gathering all the evidence. I had to be smart about it. At first, I focused on the financials. I went through all of our bank statements, credit card records, and the receipts I had found in Derek's desk. Every purchase, every luxury item, every restaurant receipt that I knew hadn't been for the family, but for his secret life. I made detailed notes, cross-referencing dates with his business trips that I now knew were lies. But it wasn't just about money. It was about proving that he had used the family resources for his own gain, while I had been running the household, paying the bills, raising the kids. The financial evidence was solid, but it wasn't enough. I knew that. I needed something more concrete, something undeniable. Then it hit me, the security footage. Derek thought he was clever, hiding everything, thinking I was too busy with the kids and the house to notice. What he didn't know was that I was the one who had helped design the security system for his office building. When they renovated a few years ago, I was the one who sat down with the contractor, chose the cameras, and made sure everything was set up. Derek had no idea that I knew exactly where the cameras were and how to access the footage. I hadn't used the cameras in years, but I had kept the passwords and access codes, just in case. I never thought I'd need to use them, but now, everything I had worked for, everything I had believed in, was falling apart. I wasn't going to let Derek get away with it. I sat down at my computer, my hands trembling slightly as I typed in the codes. The screen flickered to life, and there it was, the footage. Derek walking into his office after work, Vanessa following closely behind. They smiled, laughing, looking at each other in that way that I hadn't seen Derek look at me in years. My stomach churned as I watched the way they interacted. There was no doubt in my mind now. They had been seeing each other for months. I watched the footage for hours. It was painful. Each clip, each frame, confirmed what I had feared, but it also gave me something stronger than the anger I had felt earlier. It gave me power. I had proof. I had everything I needed to take action. It wasn't just about making Derek feel the sting of betrayal. It was about taking back control of my life. I had spent so long putting his needs first, standing by him while he built his career, raising our kids while he played golf and went on lavish trips. I had put my own dreams on hold for him and for the family. And now he had the nerve to lie, cheat, and use me like a doormat? No, I was done. I sat down and started drafting the email. It was cold, professional, and precise, no emotion, just the facts. I wasn't going to waste time making it personal or dramatic. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for justice. I sent the email to Richard Barnes, Derek's boss, with all the attached evidence, the bank statements, the receipts, the security footage. I included everything. This wasn't about revenge. It was about making Derek understand that his actions had consequences. It was about exposing the lies, the manipulation, and the destruction he had caused, not just to me but to everything I had worked so hard to build. I knew Derek would never expect it. He would never imagine that I had the courage, the intellect, and the resources to do this. He had underestimated me at every turn, thinking that his charm, his power, and his arrogance would protect him. But now he had crossed the line. He thought he could take advantage of me, but I was done being his pawn. I took a deep breath and hit send. The weight that lifted from my chest in that moment was liberating. I wasn't just taking control of the situation, I was taking control of my life. This wasn't about Derek anymore. This was about me, my future, and my children's future. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen as the email notification confirmed it had been sent. The next steps were clear. I had done my part. I had exposed the truth. Now it was up to Derek to deal with the fallout. The email was ready. I could feel the weight of it. A digital bullet poised to shatter everything Derek had worked for. The truth was finally in my hands, and I couldn't help but marvel at the meticulous way it all came together. Every text, every bank statement, every screenshot, every piece of evidence I had carefully amassed over the past few days. It was all there, like a puzzle finally falling into place. All of Derek's lies, his deceit, the carefully crafted illusion of his perfect life, all exposed. I hit send, and as the email shot off into the ether, a sense of finality settled over me. I knew exactly what would happen next. Once Richard, Derek's boss, opened that email, Derek's world would come crashing down. His career would be over. He'd lose his job, his access to the company, and all the respect he'd worked so hard to build over the years. His reputation would be in ruins. The power, the status, the privilege he'd so carelessly flaunted. It would all vanish in the blink of an eye. But as the reality of what I had just done sank in, I felt nothing. No guilt, no remorse, just the cold satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about hurting him in the same way he had hurt me. This wasn't about causing him pain. This was about making him face the consequences of his actions. He had lived a life of lies, manipulation, and betrayal for far too long, and now it was time for him to understand what it felt like to have the ground ripped out from under him. For so long, Derek had taken everything for granted. He thought he could get away with everything because he was charming, persuasive, and, let's be honest, he thought he was untouchable. He believed that no one, especially not me, would ever question his actions. I had been the perfect wife, the one who stayed at home, took care of the kids, kept everything running smoothly, all while supporting his career. I had stood by him through everything, even when he was emotionally distant, even when I could see the cracks forming in our relationship. I had told myself that it was just a phase, that things would get better. But all the while, he had been living a double life, making a mockery of everything we had built. I wasn't angry anymore. The anger I had felt when I first discovered his affair had subsided, replaced with something colder, more focused. It wasn't about hurting him. It was about making him see the truth. I wanted him to feel the weight of his choices, to understand that lies have consequences. And I wanted him to understand that, for the first time in years, I wasn't just the woman who stood by, waiting for him to get his act together. I was the woman who had taken control of her life, who was no longer willing to be manipulated or deceived. The silence in the room was deafening as I sat back in my chair, watching the screen, waiting for any kind of response. Part of me wanted him to call, to beg, to try to talk his way out of it. But deep down, I knew there was nothing left to say. The damage had already been done. He had lost everything that mattered, and no apology could fix that. I knew that Derek wouldn't see this coming. He thought he could control everything, that he could hide his betrayal and keep living his life like nothing had happened. But I had been paying attention. I had been watching, listening, and now the truth was out. The ball was in his court, but he wasn't in control anymore. As the minutes passed, I let the silence wash over me. This moment, this feeling of empowerment, was all I needed. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was a victim. I didn't feel helpless. I had taken the first step in reclaiming my life, and I wasn't going to look back. I closed my laptop, feeling the weight of everything lift off my shoulders. It was over. But while Derek was now at the mercy of his own actions, I knew there was still more work to be done. The consequences of his betrayal were only beginning. But I didn't have to worry about that. The ball was no longer in my court. It was his turn to face the music. Hey, are you finding the story interesting so far? If you are, make sure to subscribe to the channel so we can continue the adventure together. The best part is just ahead. Within hours, the repercussions of Derek's betrayal began to unfold. I watched as everything I had hoped for him to build, the career he'd spent years cultivating, the status he'd so proudly flaunted, began to crumble piece by piece. The phone rang incessantly. His calls, his texts, his desperate pleas. They all came flooding in. At first, I stared at the screen, my heart not racing but steady, cold. The name Derek flashed across my phone, over and over again. Each time I let it ring out. I wasn't interested in his apologies anymore. I had long since stopped caring about the man who had not only betrayed me but had discarded our family as if it was nothing. The truth was now out. Derek had lost everything he held dear, the job that was his identity, the respect of his colleagues, and the image he had spent so many years constructing. His career, his life's work, was no longer under his control. I watched as his world came crashing down, not with glee, but with a sense of grim satisfaction. There was a certain relief that came with this. It was the kind of release that happens when a long, suffocating breath is finally exhaled. I had been living in a cage of my own design for years, not realizing the bars were slowly closing in around me until Derek's lies had piled up high enough that the weight of them had begun to crush me. Now, as I sat back in the empty house, I realized how much lighter I felt. It was a strange feeling, almost surreal. The silence was deafening but also comforting. There was no more walking on eggshells, no more tiptoeing around Derek's moods, no more pretending everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. I spent the next few days navigating this newfound freedom. The house, though still physically empty, didn't feel like a prison anymore. I moved through it slowly, methodically, savoring the quiet. There was no one here to tell me what to do, no one whose expectations I had to meet. The space I once shared with Derek, the space that was filled with tension and unspoken words, now seemed like a canvas ready to be painted with the colors of a new life. For the first time in years, I wasn't living under the shadow of someone else's choices. I was living for myself. I began making plans. Real plans. I had spent so many years putting my dreams aside to support Derek, to support the family. I had sacrificed my career, my passions, my freedom, all in the name of maintaining the family structure that now lay in ruins. But no more. It was time to rebuild. It was time to take control of my own life. The first step was the divorce. I knew it wouldn't be easy. It never is. But I was determined to do it right, to protect myself and my children from any further emotional harm. I reached out to my lawyer, Stephanie, who had already been working behind the scenes to make sure I was protected financially. She had been incredible, no-nonsense, practical, and, most importantly, on my side. She told me everything I needed to do, from freezing joint accounts to making sure I had a solid plan for my future. There was no time to waste. I couldn't afford to be caught off guard. Derek had made his choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. I made a list of everything I needed to do, checking it off one item at a time. I had already contacted my financial advisor, making sure that all our assets were accounted for, and I began putting together a budget that would allow me to live independently. For the first time in a long time, I was doing something for myself. Every step I took, every decision I made was mine and mine alone. The weight of the past few years began to lift, and the prospect of starting fresh felt like a gift, one that I wasn't going to waste. But even as I felt the freedom of my choices, there was still the reality of what I was facing. There were the kids to think about, Mia and Jake. I could feel the burden of responsibility for them pressing on me. How would they handle this transition? How would I explain to them that their father wasn't the person they thought he was? How would I keep them safe from the fallout of Derek's actions? The questions loomed large, but I knew one thing for certain. I was going to do whatever it took to protect them. I sat down with Mia and Jake on the third day after everything had fallen apart. It wasn't easy. They were confused, angry, sad. All of the emotions that come with the collapse of a family. I could see the hurt in their eyes, the sense of betrayal and confusion, but I also knew they needed to understand. You know that everything happening right now isn't your fault, I told them. Your father's actions, they were his choices, not yours, and you'll never have to take responsibility for them. Mia, who had been quiet up until that point, spoke first. But Mom, we thought you two were happy. You always looked happy. I swallowed the lump in my throat. We weren't happy, Mia. Not really. We were pretending for a long time. But you're right about one thing, we can build a new kind of happiness. One that's real. Jake looked at me, his eyes wide, trying to process what I had just said. Is he coming back? He asked softly, the hope in his voice too obvious. No, I said firmly. Your father made his choices, and now we're going to start fresh. We're going to make new memories, new traditions, and we'll do it together. That evening, after Mia and Jake had gone to bed, I walked through the house again, feeling that strange sense of peace. It was a peace born not from the absence of Derek, but from the certainty that I had made the right decision. I wasn't going to let his mistakes define me anymore. I wasn't going to let his toxic influence linger in our lives. I had already taken the first step by exposing the truth, and now I was taking the next by starting the process of healing for myself and for my children. I stood in front of the window, looking out at the darkened skyline, feeling the cool breeze through the open window. For the first time in years, I wasn't holding my breath. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had faced the worst, and I had come out on the other side stronger. The next morning, I sat down at my desk and started making plans. Not just for the divorce, but for the life I was going to build for myself. I wasn't going to be a victim of Derek's lies. I wasn't going to let the remnants of my past keep me from moving forward. I had come through the storm, and now I was going to rebuild my life piece by piece. The next few months were a whirlwind. It was like everything I had once known was suddenly scattered, and I was left to pick up the pieces, but this time, I was doing it on my terms. The chaos that had once controlled me was now giving way to a sense of purpose I had never known before. I focused on myself, on rediscovering who I was outside of the role I had been playing for so many years. I began with reconnecting with friends I had lost touch with over the years. It was amazing how easily some friendships fell back into place, as if no time had passed at all. It had been so long since I had truly laughed, shared a glass of wine, and not had to worry about someone else's needs or approval. My friends were there for me, offering not just emotional support but real, tangible advice about how to move forward. I had spent so many years caught up in a toxic relationship with Derek that I had neglected the people who mattered most, the ones who saw me for who I truly was. Rediscovering old hobbies became a form of therapy. I dusted off my camera, the one I had once loved to use before the weight of my responsibilities had pushed my creative side to the back burner. I started taking walks around the neighborhood, snapping photos of the little details I'd missed. The wildflowers growing in cracks of the sidewalk, the sunlight streaming through the trees, the way the city looked just before sunset. The lens of the camera allowed me to focus on something other than the wreckage of my life, and it was liberating. I also began writing again, something I hadn't done in years. I started journaling about my experiences, my emotions, and my hopes for the future. The words flowed easily, and I realized that I had a lot more inside me than I ever gave myself credit for. For the first time in a long while, I was doing things that made me happy, not out of obligation but because I wanted to. And then there was the business venture. It was something I had always dreamed about, but it felt like a distant fantasy while I was married to Derek. Now, with the freedom to make my own decisions, I found myself researching, planning, and taking small steps to turn my dream into a reality. I had always wanted to open a boutique, something small but unique, a place where I could sell handmade crafts, vintage items, and locally sourced goods. It was a way for me to build something on my own, to prove to myself that I was capable of more than just being Derek's wife. Every step I took to make this dream happen felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I had forgotten. Mia and Jake struggled with the transition, but they eventually understood. I could see it in their eyes, the confusion, the sadness, the fear of what the future held. But I also saw them beginning to adjust. I made sure they knew that their father's actions weren't their fault. I didn't want them to feel responsible for the collapse of our family. We sat down often, talked through their feelings, and tried to create an environment that was as normal as possible under the circumstances. It wasn't always easy. There were tears, there were angry outbursts, and there were quiet moments where they both just needed to sit beside me. I listened to them, letting them express whatever was on their minds, no matter how messy or complicated it was. I knew that if I could help them understand what had happened, and that it wasn't their fault, then we could begin healing together. Together, we started creating new traditions, ones built on honesty, respect, and love. Our old traditions were tainted, shadows of a life that had never been as perfect as we had made it out to be. Now we could make new memories. Sunday mornings became our time to do whatever we wanted. Whether it was baking pancakes, playing games, or going on long walks. We had movie nights where we chose films we had never seen, just for the fun of it. Holidays were celebrated in our own way, with no expectations other than to be together, to laugh, and to simply enjoy each other's company. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. As for Derek, he tried to fight me in court, but I was prepared. I wasn't the same woman he had once controlled. There was no fear in my heart anymore, no hesitations. I had the evidence, I had the strength, and most importantly, I had the resolve to see this through. Derek's attempts to manipulate the situation were weak, and I wasn't buying any of it. In the past, I had been too afraid of the consequences, too afraid of what might happen if I stood up for myself. But now, the idea of letting him back into my life was not even a consideration. I was stronger, smarter, and more determined than ever before. The courtroom battles were tense, but they weren't nearly as important as the internal battles I had already won. Derek tried to pull the same tactics he always used, appealing to my emotions, playing the victim, and blaming me for the marriage's failure. But I saw through it all. I wasn't the naive woman I had been. I wasn't the person he could bend and shape to his will anymore. I had become someone unrecognizable even to myself, a woman who had taken control of her own narrative, who wasn't afraid to fight for what was right. I walked away from the divorce proceedings with my dignity intact and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about the money or the property. It was about reclaiming my life, my independence, and my worth. Derek had no power over me anymore, and that, more than anything, was the most empowering feeling I had ever experienced. The victory wasn't just in the legal papers. It was in the fact that I had finally stopped living for someone else and started living for me. On my 41st birthday, I woke up to a world of possibilities. The weight of the past had lifted, and the future stretched out before me, wide open. There was no more pretending, no more lies. I was finally living life on my own terms, and it felt incredible. The first thing I did that morning was open the window, letting in the fresh air, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. I had spent so many years trapped in a life that wasn't mine, in a relationship that didn't respect me, and now here I was, with nothing holding me back. I made coffee, sat by the window, and looked out over the city. There was something so beautiful in the quiet of the morning, something peaceful in knowing that I had come this far. The pain of the past was still there, but it wasn't what defined me anymore. It was just another chapter in my story, a chapter that was now closed. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I felt ready for it. I felt like I had a choice. The possibilities felt endless, and I was finally free to explore them. Whether it was through my new business, reconnecting with people I cared about, or simply enjoying the small moments of life, I knew that I was on the right path. This was my new beginning, and I was going to embrace it with everything I had. Conclusion: this is a story of betrayal, but also of personal strength. It's a reminder that, no matter how hard life may seem when you're faced with heartbreak, you have the power to take back control. Don't let anyone diminish your worth. Stand tall, move forward, and remember, the best revenge is living well. So, what do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings about the story. Did it resonate with you? Or maybe it made you think about your own journey? Leave a comment and share your reflections or feedback. I really enjoy hearing from you. And hey, if you haven't already, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss out on the next exciting story. Thank you so much for sticking with me through the end of this one. Your support means the world. I can't wait to share the next one with you.